when we make ijtihad in i'tiqad,
Mm.
this is impermissible because we base everything on the text that came to us.
Yes, you are not supposed to be doing this,
Mm.
but it can be understood
Right.
why and how it happens
Mm.
when you look at the reasons how they reached it. Because what's happening is because to do naql of a text, naql is and aql are two different things. Naql is to hand the text down according to how the people before you received it,
Mm-hmm.
the way it was spoken, the way they understood it, and to hand it down. This is naql, because one of the meanings of naql is to move. And when you move, if I move you from your house where you are to another house, I don't move some of your things. I move all of them exactly how you'd move them. Usually I'll set your furniture back up like how it was set up at your old house. That's naql. Now, when you read ayat and ahadith, then you start to compare and you make conclusions that had not been made, or you come to conclusions that had not been made, or you combine certain things together and reach conclusions that had not been made, then you fall into ijtihad and i'tiqad, which should not be done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And these are things that have happened. I mean, it's not just this. It's like you had Imam Suyuti trying to answer some of the Christian arguments and made ijtihad and i'tiqad regarding the Rasulullah's parents and other things. The affirmation of the barzakh as a place, when the barzakh isn't a place, it's a barrier, which is very clearly mentioned in Surah Al-Mu'minun, the 23rd Surah 100, that it's a barrier between the dunya and the akhirah. He's affirmed as like an alam, like a world, like another place, right? And this has then been funneled down. So there's some Muslim nowadays that think that the barzakh is like a place, the world of the barzakh, right? And this is not from al-Qurun al-Thalath. It's not from there.
This what is being said, that it is 3 phases instead of 2, basically.
Yeah. So this is what's happened because they've wound up affirming this. So for Taqi ibn Taymiyyah's position in al-Aqidah al-Hamawiyya, the Kubra and the Sughra, is you can see that he's going to the further end of Ithbat because he's seeing so much nefi happening. He's going to the far end. Then he's using philosophical arguments to explain this, and it's leading to like the ilm al-kalam and falsafa. It's leading to things like hayula, as which is the belief of all the creation being in the essence, and being able to know the meanings and names and attributes from Allah. These types of things are happening. His unique interpretation of Shafa, that someone can only make intercession to Allah with his iman in the particular person, right? So you say, okay, well, I'm making intercession to Allah with the Prophet ﷺ, but I'm doing so with my iman in him. It's like, well, wait a minute, hold on. No one ever made that caveat. But his response was, well, you'd have to, because to do so with his jah, with the essence, the actual person of someone, this would be shirk, because this is a form of shirk, because you cannot approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this person because he is not giving you permission to do it. He did not deny that they could hear. He affirmed that the deceased, they hear. And that the Rasulullah, when people made supplication and asked him in the supplication, sometimes he would make supplication for them because he didn't want their hearts to be broken. He said, but that's not proof that it's valid. That's just proof that he's rahmatul lil alameen. So we're clear that he believed in the hearing of the dead, but the hear and everything else. The issue is you don't have permission to do this. And his most outstanding work is Qa'id al-Jalila fi at-Tawassul wal Wasila, which I've translated. I'm currently working on the notes for it because I want this book to come out, because there's a misunderstanding that people have, thinking that Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah taught that setting out to the graves or visiting the graves or whatever else is major shirk. And he didn't teach that. He taught that it's minor. And the reasoning behind it and the arguments behind it were very particular. But it has to be understood that his understanding has to be put in context of the reality. And by setting that book out, and then also citing the literature from the time period that's contrary, this will be a very important presentation on this topic.
Right, mashallah.
So we're just right now making the process because some brothers put some funding behind it for this to be done. So we're in the process of this right now. But the fact of the matter is this book, Qa'ida Jalil fi Tawassul wa Wasila, he sort of made this division between making shafa'a with your deeds and your iman in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but you can't do it with his person. And then he also, his position regarding seeing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a wakeful state or seeing malaik and other things, he attacked a lot of this and said most of these are jinn or shayateen that people are seeing. Now, there's some truth in that, but the way that it was denied, the way that he wrote it, the way he said, made it seem as if he was denying karramat, another thing, which got him in an incredible amount of trouble. And so he wound up being in jail in Al-Qal'a in Syria. He wound up being in jail in Alexandria, Egypt. But Ibn Ata'al al-Iskandari actually met him and spoke with him. And it was a very interesting exchange because he had said to him, he said, "Dear Faqih." So he addressed him as a Faqih.
Right.
And he said, "Why do you negate visiting of the deceased and making intercession with the deceased and visiting the grave sites and setting out on journeys to visit the grave sites?" He said, "Because of the rule of Sadd al-Dhara'i, the ruling of shutting off means to the impermissible, because it's a means to shirk, and I'm shutting doors to shirk." And so Ibn Ata'Allah, he said, then in that case, would you not demand that the faces and breasts of women be cut off as a means of blocking the ways to fornication and zina? And Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he smiled at that point because he understood that the point mentioned was a very valid point. You don't destroy something to stop the means to something. Right? So this understanding was very clear. Now, sometimes he retracted some positions, like, for example, in the latter part of his life, his position regarding the prophets committing sins. He retracted it because before he had held opinions that the prophets were capable of committing major and minor sins. And then at the end of his life, he affirms that no, the prophets are infallible and they will not commit major or minor sins, which is the standard position. So and walked away from that.
On this particular point, we can also say, due to the use of kalam, he was actually not the only one who said this.
No, he was not the only one, because and if someone reads Al-Aqidah al-Sahihah, written by others before his time, they can see that this was said by others before his time, utilizing the same methodology, and it led them down that same dark, dusty road. So if you follow that, you'll find yourself in the same set of circumstances. So the Imam, while he was in jail and out of jail, he never stopped writing. And in fact, he was able to go on jihad. And in the battle of Shaghab in 709 Hijri, he was in battle against the Tatar. And so he had a huge writing career. So he's writing from the battlefield, he's writing in prison, outside of prison. He has a huge writing quest during all of these great times where he's going in and out of prison. Some of his students get put in jail at the time as well, because Ibn Kathir wound up in jail, Ibn Al-Qayyim wound up in jail. Al-Dhahabi was persecuted. I don't remember off the top of my head whether he was in jail, but he had some problems where he was persecuted. He had a lot of issues, right? And anyone that was associated with him or uttered or said that I'm in agreement with him, people that did that really faced the backlash of the scholars of the time. And it wasn't just like your normal muftis and run-of-the-mill people.
Right.
Were qadis, Murajjih, really high-ranking people. Abu Hamza al-Maqdisi is not a mufti or a government scholar. He's one of the highest voices in the madhhab during his time. So when this happens, when this happens, and he sends him the year of his death, he sends him a letter to say, don't pass any more rulings because of the dissension that it's causing and all the fighting. And the Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he responds, fa'ajaba, he responds. And he doesn't pass any more rulings, which shows that he belongs to a structure.
Right, yes.
Because if he didn't belong to a structure, he'd carry on as he was. He said, I don't have to listen to you because if you're an absolute mujtahid or mujtahid that's above reproach, you don't obey other mujtahids. But if you're under authority,
right,
if you're outranked by other people and they outrank you, when they tell you to stop doing something, you stop doing it.
Now, this brings me to one question now. What was Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah's rank in ijtihad?
Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is referred to as a Mujtahid Al-Murajjih, a preferential Mujtahid. We can see this from his writings. We can see his placement within the madhhab, because in the kutub, whenever they discuss preferred opinions, where there'll be like 2 rulings or whatever else, his name will be brought up as, well, listen, this has been mentioned by this person. And then right after, they'll usually have, what's sahihuhu, but the authentic position is this, or the ruling on this matter is this. Because usually when you talk about tarjih in matters, his name will crop up.
Right.
If there's something like this to do with tarjih and matters. Now, Imam Alauddin Mardawi, at the beginning of Al-Insaf, rahimahullah, he died 85. He mentions at the end of 9 books, Taqi ibn Taymiyyah is number 9 of source literature cited. So he's in there, but he's number 9. Now, there's a statement that is attributed to Alauddin Mardawi that is true, but needs to be kept in context. It's the statement that it's been said by a group of our companions that he was an absolute mujtahid, right? This statement, number 1, you have to remember Alauddin Mardawi, he, in the book Al-Insaf, he cites all the rulings in the madhhab where there's a dispute. And then he tells you what sahihu hadha, the authentic is this, right? When a position is unreliable or a position is not given precedence or credence, he'll say it's been said, and he won't cite names. Or he'll say the overwhelming preponderance is this, and he won't cite who differs, because it's not a strong enough opinion to state. And this was one example of that. Furthermore, is when he cites Taqi ibn Taymiyyah in the book of Qada and other areas, he has Al-Hanbali at the end of his name. The same thing with the rest of the literature. The stamps on the beginning of Majmu' Fatawa, which have been transmitted, the strongest forms have been transmitted by Sulaiman ibn Abdul Wahhab to his son Muhammad, to his grandson Abdul Aziz, right? That transmission, it's got Al-Hanbali on it. Al-Dhahabi has Al-Hanbali affixed to his name, and Tariq al-Islam, as well as Sir A'lam al-Nubala. When reference is made to him by people in other methods, he's called Al-Hanbali. No one assumes that he's another, he has his own madhhab. No one makes this understand. No one has this assumption or understanding.
And he used the word ashabuna, right?
Yes. Yeah, ashabuna, our companions, and imamuna. In his literature, he's made this very clear, and this is madhhab parlance, that someone belongs to a particular madhhab. When he was asked in volume 10, what are the mu'tamid books? And he said, well, he cited his grandfather and Muwaffiq al-Qudami, he said, but there are other books, but there are other ways to find out the mu'tamid without using them. And he cited other books before them. He didn't say his own books. He didn't say, read my book. He said there are other ways to find out the mu'tamid, not just through these, but there's another way if you are diligent. And he one of the books he quoted was Al-Bulgha, which is by obviously one of his ancestors. But we noticed that he didn't say, read this book of mine. Because the fact of the matter is he never made or was told or asked to write a complete fiqh text. He never was. Right? Now keep this in mind, because he wrote some notes on Al-Umda, Sharh Al-Umda. But if you compare that with the Sharh that was done by Baha'uddin al-Maqdisi rahimahullah, the first cousin of Muwaffiq al-Qudama, empirically you can see that Baha'uddin al-Maqdisi's Sharh is better. You can empirically see that it's better because it's a Sharh. It's not ta'liqat, it's a Sharh.
Right, yeah.
You can empirically see that it's better. Right? If you look at Fakhruddin ibn Taymiyyah, he created a curriculum of fiqh where he just wrote 3 big books. Look at Muwaffiq al-Qudama, he created an entire curriculum. Right? It's clear that these people are mujtahids, not of just that degree, but marja people that have created curricula for the madhhab. They've left behind 4, 5, 6 books they've created. So when you understand that in perspective, you gather and understand Taqi ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah's rank within the school. He's a towering figure, but he's not the mu'tamid.
Sheikh, so what you just explained is basically he did not meet the conditions to be called Shaykh al-Madhhab.
Yeah, he wouldn't be, because he doesn't have all those qualities. The people, if you just compare him to Muwaffiq al-Qudama, there's only 43 years between them. But it's not comparable.
Right. Because
you have to remember, Imam Muwaffiq al-Qudama rahimahullah is penning al-Mughni when he's 18 years old. Taqi ibn Taymiyyah is passing fatwa and everything else when he's 19, but he's not penning a 12-volume sharh. He's not putting together an entire curricula. That's not what he's doing during that time. Now that because we have to balance between reviling him and sycophancy, because neither of those is correct. Reviling him as if he has no knowledge is just plain foolishness. Because we can see from people that are outside of the madhhab, that are outside of his discipline, that they acknowledge his rank. Otherwise, Ibn Ata al-Qadri wouldn't have called him a faqih. I wouldn't have shown him deference. And people after he died are making tabarruk with his hair. So obviously, if he wasn't these things, people that were opponents of him were having dreams about him preaching from a mimbar of light. So it's obvious that we're not talking about that. And then sycophancy.
Right.
Now, sycophancy is also a disease to where you use him as the measuring stick of all of the scholars. And this isn't correct.
Sure.
Because first of all, it's not the measuring stick in the school of Imam Ahmad, because we discussed in the podcast we've done before how one arrives at the understanding the mu'tamid and everything else. We already discussed this.
Sure.
Then you can also see in the books that have been listed by the scholars, whether it's Al-Adin, Mardawi, and others, on how to find the mu'tamid in the mu'tamid literature.
Yes.
And Majmu' Fatawa is not mentioned as mu'tamid literature, or Al-Fatawa al-Kubra is not mentioned as mu'tamid literature. Not because there's no knowledge at all. No.
Yes.
Because it's not mu'tamid. That's why. And at the listing of some 9 books, he's number 9.
Wow, subhanAllah.
He's number 9, not because he doesn't have knowledge, because he's not mu'tamid. And the nawadir that he has, which will obviously we can talk about coming up, are not to be followed. And for good reason, because it's not just that, listen, this isn't the mu'tamid of the madhhab. Some of it contravenes consent, it contravenes ijma.
Yes.
It can't be followed. Because it contravenes ijma. Like the meaning of shafa. What does shafa mean? the position that he has, which has come through ijtihad, that contravenes ijma. To say that all of what we see of the creation, what we see and what we don't see, was in the essence of Allah, this contravenes ijma. And if believed simply as it was without having reached ijtihad, this can remove you from the religion.
SubhanAllah.
Believing that the fire will go out at some point, the fana'un nar, this is contravenes ijma and the plain text of the Quran.
Right.
So we have some 11 masa'il that we just simply cannot follow theologically in this regard. There are other nawadir in fiqh that are just, no, we can't abide by that.
Before we would address those points, I would like to ask you, obviously what you just mentioned, we have sufficient information on why he's not the rank that he's claimed to be. But another point was, if somebody claimed that he's a Mujtahid Mutlaq, then there should have been an usul, right? That he had his own usul.
Yes.
But that was never narrated by him or his
No,
students.
the thing about it is, if somebody looks at his Majmu' Fatawa and they look under his Nawaqid al-Wudu or his under his Salah, there's nothing in there that runs contrary to the method of Muhammad.
Right.
Including placing the right hand on the left under the navel. And in fact, he insists the ahadith otherwise, like above, he insists they're all da'if.
Okay, subhanAllah.
He insists they're da'if.
Allah.
Right? But these types of things, and in addition to that, in volume 10, he was asked about people making dhikr to the degree that they sway back and forth and then their amamas come off and they reveal the tops of their heads. He says, with regards to them making dhikr, this is not impermissible, but for them to reveal their heads without sufficient reason is not right. Right? So these things, which is strange because those people that would call themselves acolytes of his, which they're not, they're sycophants. The people that are sycophants, their main marker is that they're bareheaded.
Yes.
When he despised bareheadedness,
SubhanAllah.
He despised it, which is an amal, which is something that's particular of him and the school of Muhammad. Right? They despise it. So it's one of the strange matters that is attributed. Sometimes the people that say they love you the most love you the least.
SubhanAllah.
So when looking at him, to put him in perspective and in concluding his life, he ultimately dies in jail in the year 728 Hijri. Now, the primary transmitter of his works includes Imam Muhammad ibn Uthman al-Zahabi, Imam Abu al-Fida, Imad al-Din ibn Kathir, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, and Ibn Rajab through Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. These are his primary transmitters. There's others besides, because he had some 100 students, including even the writer of the Shafi fiqh, Kifayat al-Akhyar. He was a student of Taqi ibn Taymiyyah. Right? So he had a wide body of people that learned from him. Imam Najmuddin al-Tufi. Imam Najmuddin al-Tufi is also the one who recorded, because some people say that Ibn Batutta had a slip by saying that when he came to Damascus, Taqi ibn Taymiyyah said that Allah descends as I do from this minbar. Right? He had a slip because there's no way he could have said that, because in this year he was in the year he claimed he was in jail. So yes, but Najmuddin al-Tufi has a year when he's not in jail, and he was actually in the gathering where it happened, and he narrated it.
Wow. So
what do you do with that?
Wow.
And Najmuddin al-Tufi, this isn't where he says, I am Ash'ari Shi'i, because in this early part of his career, he was like reading from many different sources. So he was saying that he was an Ash'ari Shi'i because he had Mu'tazila leanings.
Right.
We're talking about a fully completed Najmuddin al-Tufi now. Height of his manhood, height of his scholarship. Okay. He's there in the gathering where he made that statement. So we can't deny that. When he says that Allah descends just as I descend, meaning that it's a descent that we can understand. Right? When he did that, it's not just Ibn Batutta. Okay, maybe Ibn Batutta had the year wrong, but that incident happened is not in dispute. Because Najmuddin al-Tufi narrated that same thing. And the difference is Ibn Battuta walked in on it. The difference is Najmuddin al-Tufi was there for the entire environmental circumstances around the incident. What happened in the lead up to it and the incident itself. That's the difference.
So did this happen before he was stopped from giving fatwa?
Yeah, this was before the 708 jailing.
Okay. I would like to know, when we talked about him being stopped by giving fatwa, had he already by then uttered or made fatwa on all of the 11 masa'il?
Yeah, much of this had already happened.
That already happened. Okay.
Much of this had already happened. But we have to understand another thing. When he dies 728 Hijri, his opponents and his advocates all prey on him. After his death, as his books are being handed down, more people start to dogpile on him. There were rulings that he passed, like the majalis that he was in, the councils that he was in, where people were discussing with him and trying to get him to renege on certain things. Those are all in public view, whether it's from Ibn Shakir, Ibn Kathir, al-Dhahabi, Ibn Rajab, Ibn Qayyim. These are commonly known. They're publicly known. They're not hidden. Much of what people started dogpiling upon him about in the later ages after his death, like a century or so, are things that never came up in the council meetings, not because they weren't wrong, but because the overall issues why he got in trouble were those things brought out in those council meetings. So what happened a century after his death, up until this time now, is people are even bringing up things that weren't even discussed by those people in that time period.
Yes.
Because those people in that time period were prioritizing and dealing with the things in their time period. So we have to also keep this in mind.
If I may ask, Sheikh, during his lifetime, when those councils happened, was there a particular statement laid down? Because some, today there's claims that people in his lifetime, like Ibn Jahbal al-Kilabi and the likes, they called him either a mujassim or a mubtadi'. So what was the decisive statement in his lifetime that the ulama made?
There were books written against him. There were books written against him regarding his position on jihad. On Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possessing a direction. There were books written upon him, and he was using these terminologies and arguments because of ilm al-kalam and philosophy. And so he was discussing with people who were highly philosophically bent, using their philosophical principles. And his goal was to try to use philosophy to show the falsehood of philosophy. That philosophy itself was flawed and that you can't rely on it as a proof.
Even though it's not the Hanbali methodology.
Yes, it's not their way.
Yeah, okay.
To depend upon this as an asl for understanding the sources of the revealed law. But he sought to do so to create like a self-refuting thing. Listen, look, it's refuting itself. But in the process of doing this, using aqliyat, these logical arguments and all these other things, you fall into issues. And that's ultimately what wound up happening with his circumstances. He fell into some of these issues. So people argued with him about the jihad, they argued with him about the sifat, and people accused him of these things. But understand this, if he was definitely held to be a mujassim and definitely held to be mushabbih, he would have been killed. He would have been killed. Yes, people said the words and things that he says are tantamount to this. The like the luzum, like if you carry it to its logical outcome, yes, it will equal this. But no one said you have to kill this man. Because there were rulers in that time period that were not personally disposed to him. In fact, there were attempts to outlaw the madhhab of Imam Ahmad in Damascus and other things like this. You also have to keep in mind that the same people that would say today that they are the representatives, the sole representatives of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, you and I all know, you and I both know that every mimbar is the mimbar of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and anything that has to do with him is respected and noble, like his mimbar. Yes. So in the time of Imam Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi, these people that would say they're the sole representatives of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah to the exclusion of everyone else actually took axes and destroyed Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi's mimbar. As well as that of Muwaffaq, they destroyed those mimbars to the point that there was nothing left but splinters. Now, that's not kufr. That's not disrespecting the prophets. I mean, these are the questions, you know, sometimes we have to ask these type of questions.
Yes.
What would make someone do something like that? So you have to always, you know, look at these things in perspective. So the people from the time period of Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, the people from that time period, both opponents and advocates, preyed upon him. Funeral was huge. The problem comes in the latter ages of people after this fact. For example, Al-Hariri, the Hanbali faqih, which is mentioned in Na'at al-Akmal, he mentioned some of Taqi ibn Taymiyyah's rulings to Ibn Rajab, particularly regarding 3 talaqs and 1 sitting equals 1 talaq. He exiled him. Ibn Rajab, he exiled Al-Hariri. He exiled him like 3 years. So it's obvious that it's not just talking about not more timid. Like, you don't get exiled unless you're contravening things that belong to the religion that are agreed upon as consensus. That's the only time you do hajr of someone, where they're in jala or they're in hajr, is if they contravene consensus. So when he dies, his literature that's come down to us, that's been handed down, is handed down privately. Although his scholarship is known far and wide, his literature and the study is done through people of high scholarship and high standing. It's not done through just rank and file people. It's not done in that fashion. So when you've got just rank and file people buying the 37 volumes of Majmu' Fatawa and just sitting on their shelf and just kind of strumming through it, this is a mistake.
And didn't he write in his lifetime the books mostly for the students or the ulama, not really for awam?
His writing style, when you look at his books, his writing style was for people who understood and could keep up with a certain level of what he was talking about. Like, if you look at the Majmu' Fatawa, there's no ayah citations in there. The assumption is that you know where these ayat are located.
Yes.
He may give you the takhrij of the hadith sometimes. He'll give you like the Sahabi and that annahu qala sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and then the hadith. But he won't give you like the full chain. It's you're supposed to know it. When he cites ayat of the Quran, he won't say this is sort of such and such sort of number, this ayah, that. He won't do that. This is a citation that you got to find it. Or you should know it already. You shouldn't need to go find it.
Mm-hmm.
So these things indicate that he's speaking to a certain audience. Then you have to look at the people that were in council meetings with him versus the people that listened to his speeches. His speaking style was far more convincing than his writing style. Because I've read his Majmu' Fatawa, and I've read his Qa'id Jalila and his Kitab al-Iman al-Kabir and the Iqtida' Sirat al-Mustaqim. I've read that. He's far more of a persuasive preacher than he is a writer, which explains why so many people, like big crowds and throngs of people, got behind him, because of he had such a strong speaking voice. But not when he was in councils with scholars and meetings with scholars. It wasn't like that, because they weren't looking at his speaking style. They were looking at the content of what he was saying.
Yes.
So he's far more persuasive, like spoken, than written. Because you have to think, who's he writing for?
Yeah.
Who is he writing for? Who's the target audience? And what is he trying to establish? And some of his points, especially Qa'ida Jalila, you can't fully grasp Qa'ida Jalila unless you already share his position. And what he does in the first his Muqaddimah in the first chapter, he lays out his position. And then the rest of the book is him knocking down the opposite of his position.
Right. Oh.
Which I suppose you could call strawmanning if you want to. Because if you set up a position where it's like, well, but because the first time I read it, one of my teachers gave it as like assigned reading. So read this. So I said, okay. So when I first read, I was like, yeah, but you can't but that's not what we, so there were times where I was like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that though. Because this is to do with i'tiqad now. And in i'tiqad, we don't make taqleed of anybody in i'tiqad. We follow the first three generations that they handed down to us. We don't make taqleed, so I can question these things. Because I don't make taqleed of Taqi ibn Taymiyyah in my i'tiqad. So I can be like, no, you can't, no. If it's not ijma, you can't do that. Right? So I can say, nah, that's not convincing, or that hadith, that doesn't apply to that. Because you can see from the plain sense of that hadith, like that doesn't apply. And even if you make that weak, like there were parts where I was like, okay, well, even if it's da'if, you still can't negate this. Like the hadith in Tirmidhi of the blind man that came to Rasulullah, like the amount of lateral movement that he had to do to like deal with that hadith, because there's no way to deal with that hadith. There's no way to deal with it. A man came to the Rasulullah, said, listen, I'm losing my vision. What can I do? He said, you can either be patient, I can pray for you. He said, please pray for me. He said, okay, go home, make wudu, pray 2 rak'ah, and say this dua. So listen, the man said the dua, he's not in front of the Prophet. He's not physically present.
Right.
Yes, but he was alive. Yeah, but so are dead people though. They're alive too. You're not extinguished when you're in the grave. You're alive. And he's away from him. He's not there. Yeah, but he could have gone to him and he could ask him. He's like, yeah, but the same thing in the grave, the dead can hear.
Oh, my God.
So that doesn't take away from it's like the amount of lateral movement that he had to do to try to deal. There's nowhere to go
right
with that hadith.
SubhanAllah.
So what he had to do is he spent, and you can see he was building up to it because he had to build this huge fortress around his argument before getting to that hadith. But by the time I had reached that hadith, I already knew, okay, he's trying to deal with the hadith of the blind man before he gets to it. So by the time I get there, I've checked out. I'm not dialed in because I've not accepted the beginning premises. And so his arguments about the 3 talaq in one sitting is one, and the traveling out to meet the grave, you have to accept the premise first before you're convinced by his argument.
Right, yeah.
That's what a lot of his ijtihads rest on.
If I may ask you this, Sheikh, the fatwa he made, they came out of ijtihad, so this means that he would have still gotten one reward even if he was wrong in his ijtihad.
Yes, this is correct, because he falls under the principle in place where it said, وإذا اجتهد الحاكم وأصاب فله أجران وإن أخطأ فله أجر. The hadith in Sahih Muslim. When the judge makes the ijtihad and he's correct, he has 2 rewards. If he's mistaken, he has 1. So when you understand this, where he's gone to, how a fiqh issue was made to have theological consequences, midway through Qa'idah Jadid, thinking, how did we get here? So then I had to go back to the beginning and read it again. And I thought, okay, now I know why we're here. But you have to first of all be convinced. Now, when he was preaching this to a crowd, I imagine it probably had more power because, again, he was such a persuasive speaker.
Right.
But when you can sit down away from the roar of the crowd, and just sit down and dispassionately and unemotionally weigh his evidences, it's not that convincing. It's not that convincing. That's why the scholars dealt with it the way that they did. Because it's not that that argument, Qa'idah Jadid, it's probably that kitab is probably the weaker of his arguments on that topic. Because within there is his whole, like, if you want to understand his position on intercession, setting out to visit the graves, that is all in Qa'idah Jadida. And it's in terms of like that style that he employs, it's one of the thinner discussions. It's one of the thinner ones. But again, because you're away from everything, you can sit down and just dispassionately read it.
Right. Yes.
But there's people that try to live and die by that book. And it would be humorous, like I said, if so much wasn't writing on it. But it's not humorous because there's people that live and die by it, and they're not even digesting the discussions. Like, they've accepted everything in there, like it's just established.
Yes.
And it's like, no, that's not the application of that, or that's not the application of this, or no. That the commentary on that doesn't fit with this. But they've just said, no, that's it now. The hadith is da'if, and that's all there is to it. Well, wait a minute, hold on. Or a historical incident, that historical is da'if. How can a historical incident be da'if?
Right.
It either happened or it didn't. A historical incident can't be da'if. Yeah, the Hubble telescope, that's da'if. No, it's not. It either is there or it is not.
Yes.
Now, you might say that a person that mentioned the Hubble telescope taking pictures of the background radiation from the point of creation of this universe that we live in, that guy, that scientist, he's lying. You can say that, but you can't say the Hubble is da'if itself. You can't do this.